Happy post-Easter as we now celebrate Easter Monday on this edition of Mic'd Up here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and Pittsburgh Sports Now and really across the Now family of networks. I'm your host, Mike Asti, and I am joined as always by Mike Vukovcan. And now the day after the holiday weekend, sports picks up steam yet again. A great weekend of sports and, of course, the national championship game coming up, Gonzaga and Baylor. We're going to discuss that, and we're also going to touch on whether or not Gonzaga and UCLA is the greatest college basketball game ever. Certainly, many are saying that. There's been some great ones recently, but that it's right up there. And then, of course, the Pirates' first opening series of the season. They do lose it, losing the last two games after winning in opening day. They lose the series 2-3 to the Cubs, but maybe lose more than that from that opening series. We'll give our thoughts on what we make from that opening series. But first off, Mike, how was your Easter weekend? How was your holiday?
Very good. I was able to get out of town for a couple days, get out of the house, see family, and
Nice.
Eat good, sleep, and we're ready to roll here.
Awesome. Yeah, that's what it's all about. It's every holiday is always about eating for me.
Yeah.
So that's why Thanksgiving's my favorite holiday. This is my fiance's favorite with all the ham. I love that too. We actually got my grandfather out of his assisted living for the first time in a year or so he was able to
That's big.
get out of jail, so to speak. He got to see our house for the first time, so that was cool. So a lot of work, but it was fun. It was a nice little longer break, and of course the holiday. And now back into the grind again and again. The grind here of this show is mic'd up on PSL and PSN, and it's presented by Martin Lawn Services. The sign there behind Mike says it all. Call Doug Martin at 412-849-5894. And Mike, to get us started, we are now a series into the Major League Baseball season. The Pittsburgh Pirates do lose the series, but they went into the final day of the series. They went into Easter Sunday with a chance to win the series, not the case last year, as they won that first game and then have lost the last couple. The pitching staff hasn't been horrendous. The bullpen has been okay. The offense didn't do enough those last two games after doing something in game one of the series. But again, Ke'Bryan Hayes leaving with an injury in game two of the season. Certainly the story right now and how that will affect the future of this team. What did you make from that first series? Does it change your expectations or your thought process at all? And then what do you make of Ke'Bryan Hayes' injury and how that could impact this team? Obviously, that's an understatement. He's the best player on the squad.
Well, to get into the series first, nothing happened this weekend surprised me.
Right.
I thought the bullpen was going to be good, and they had 15 innings, struck out 19 guys, had a 2.40 ERA. You do that in a series, you're going to do well. It's a lot of innings, 15 innings. That means they're averaging 5 a game, which means their starters aren't going very long. Second part is, we talked about this last week, the offense is going to be challenged all year. They just don't have, aside from when guys are going to get hot for small periods of time, they're going to be challenged all year, and it doesn't help when your best player
especially
isn't able to play. That's tough. The two biggest things that I took out of this weekend, and I'm not going to be overreacting to it. It's 3 games into 162 games.
Right.
But Gregory Polanco looked awful, just like he did last year.
Yeah.
You just have, and I said, it's 3 games. However, if we're talking about this 2 weeks into the season, you just have to wonder when the Pirates are just going to admit a mistake. And, if they don't start him, you can't just keep trotting him out there just because he's making $11 million. I understand he deserves some more time, and I'm willing to give him that. However, his leash is very short. I would rather see anybody, if he's going to look like that and not even make contact with the ball and just be a strikeout machine, I could care less how much money he's making, $11 million or not. He stinks right now, but he will be allowed to play. The other thing that's a little distressing, Mike, is, I'm not sure your take on this. This is going to get a lot of play here, the comparisons.
Sure.
But you worried about Mitch Keller?
That's going to be the other thing for sure. again, it's hard to say that through the first series of the season. I think the Greer Polanco topic is more of a concern in terms of his playing time and him individually, because there's years now of a slow start body of work. Certainly last season, how sluggish he was. He picked it up at the end of last season, but it meant nothing. And his first month and a half were god awful. I'm more concerned about Polanco and if he's ever going to turn it on, or when they're going to decide that $11 million is not worth starting if he's just flat out sucking, even if you don't care about wins and losses because it is a rebuilding season. In terms of Mitch Keller, again, it's a young player. You're looking at somebody only in their second year in the big leagues, only a handful of appearances last year, so it's hard to freak out yet, but of course there's hype. And I think also when you couple in Ke'Bryan Hayes' injury, the two things many people were pointing to this year is seeing a progression from Ke'Bryan Hayes as the face of this franchise. He's now hurt, and then even Mitch Keller as well. And certainly, even though you go 1-2 and it's not a sweep, and you won opening day and maybe you didn't play as awful as some would have thought, it's hard to leave the weekend too excited about those two things.
Well, the thing that I'm worried about with Mitch Keller is that he looks like Tyler Glasnow reincarnated.
Okay.
In that he dominates minor league pitching. You just hope he's not a 4A player. He's too good for AAA, and then he gets up here in the bright lights, and the guy can't find the plate. I swear to God, if you look at him and the way he pitches and what Tyler Glasnow did here when he was with the Pirates, it's the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, though, it's less than 20 overall games.
But yeah, the Pirates got ripped for not giving Tyler Glasnow enough time. He came up here and he couldn't find the strike zone. And Mitch Keller, this is his 16th major league start. He has a 5.81 ERA. He's pitched 69 innings, and he's walked close to 40 people. I know all the jokes are going to be, ship him to Tampa Bay and he'll be okay, but he's young, and they're going to have to. He deserves a lot more time than Gregory Polanco. Sure. However, this first start, he looked. I saw some people comment on this, and I agree with it. He looked scared out there. He just looked. You looked in his eyes, and he just didn't look like a player that looked like he belonged. He looked like he was in the bright lights, and he had something running down the back of his leg.
Yeah, a little deer in headlights. And, of course, 3 innings in the Sunday game, allowing the 3 earned runs, including a dinger, it looks like. Right now his ERA is at 9, 4 walks, 4 Ks. I will say the only defense of him is, yes, it's a 5 ERA overall in the 16 starts, but that includes a 7+ ERA 2 years ago. And last year his ERA was actually below 3 in those handful of starts. It was a 2.91. So he improved last year from where he was 2 years ago, but this obviously is an awful start. Tyler Anderson giving up a few runs as well in the start prior, and of course Chad Kuhl opening day. They don't really have, obviously, a number one guy. These are a bunch of young guys that they're just going to get time. I think when you have less than 20 starts, even though it's in 3 years, it's hard to be too scared of a guy. But yeah, this is a horrible first start. Last year was better than the year before, but it's a horrible first start, and you just don't know. But Polanco is somebody you can't wait around for.
This guy's one of the, when you compare Ke'Bryan Hayes, he's the building block for the offense.
Right.
When you want to point to a guy for pitching that needs to be what he was advertised, he needs to be a top 10 pick. He needs to be in Baseball America. He was one of their top 25 prospects in all of baseball, just like Tyler Glasnow. He has to find it here. This can't be a year where we're still in June and he's walking 6 guys a game and has a 5 ERA.
Right.
The Pirates should still put him out there, but what that tells you is they have 0 starting young pitchers that they can count on.
That's the issue, sure. Yeah, no, they don't. They don't really have, and a lot of their starting pitchers, even players that are in the starting rotation would probably be relievers on most good teams. Again, Tyler Anderson can be grouped in there too, even though he's had a few more years under his belt in the big leagues. It's going to be an issue, obviously, if he doesn't pick it up. I think his next start, the start after that, certainly are major factors here. And I think with him, as you mentioned, that he doesn't, even though, again, more to your point, even though last year his ERA was much better than the year before, he's not a guy that goes deep into games. So that's going to be a concern. That's what you want to see from a young pitcher. That's what you saw from Garrett Cole, even when he was young, even though he didn't become the Hall of Famer until he left the Pirates. He was still taking you deep into games. Certainly that's what Chad Kuhl was doing prior to his injury a few years ago. And Tyler Glass now as well. He certainly wasn't close to as good with the Pirates as he became with the Rays, but he would at least go deep into games, at least 4 or 5 innings, if not a quality start. You're looking at 3 innings or so usually from Mitch Keller, and some starts are much better than others, but there's clearly not a confidence in letting him go deep into games and that he wouldn't ruin it if he's pitching well at this point and then keeping in him longer. And of course, pitch counts across Major League Baseball. We're seeing
that's
pitchers.
The bigger thing.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation for another day. We're seeing pitchers being taken out after a 6-inning no-hitter, for crying out loud, with almost double digits in strikeouts. That's a whole ridiculous thing that annoys me. But that's not the case here. He's not going deep into games. I would almost rather see Mitch Keller allowed to go further into games, even if he's going to get shelled. Now, they don't want to do that early in the year, but I would be curious to see what happens with him once they're comfortable where they're not caring as much about wins and losses, if they're still giving him starts, if he can pitch out of jams. You mentioned deer in headlights. If he's sucking through 3 innings and it's September and you're out of the race, leave him in. See what happens. Does he throw kerosene on the fire or does he improve himself? See how he handles that as a pitcher, because maybe his personality isn't going to handle these bright lights. Maybe that is a concern.
Yeah, and the other interesting point that we saw yesterday was when they put Key Brian Hayes on the disabled list, the 10-day DL, which is better than the alternative.
It could have been much worse.
Yeah,
sure.
In that he could have been out for months. So let's hope that it's for the Pirates' sake. It's only less than 2 weeks and he's back. The thing that I found interesting, though, was that we talked about this last week, in that the only time Todd Frazier was going to return to the Pirates was an injury.
Right, here it is. Third base.
You had an injury with Hayes.
Right.
And instead of calling him up, and it wasn't as though he hadn't played and wasn't in game shape or hadn't seen pitches.
Yeah.
They had the option of bringing him up here.
He's hitting in training camp. Yeah.
Yeah, to bring him up here and play third base until Hayes returned, whenever he does return.
Yeah.
And they chose not to do that. So I'd be curious, if you gave Todd Frazier the truth serum, see what he's thinking about not getting that call up over somebody else.
And I'd imagine that he wants the call up, because again, you can go back to the comments when he signed that he didn't love playing with the Pirates, but he got to showcase himself. So if he wants somewhere else, he got to do it in the big leagues. And as we talked about last week, he's hit 20 home runs as recent as 2019, 21 dingers that year. He can have some pop in his bat. And of course, when Keybrian Hayes is healthy, when Morton's there, with that whole team around the infield, of course, and even in the outfield, unless you give him the outfield glove with Polanco, he clearly cannot do it defensively anywhere but third or maybe first. And this is an opportunity. So even if you're going to, no matter what he does, if you're going to bounce him in 2 weeks, okay. But this, you would think, is the opportunity for him to showcase himself. If they're going to keep him and do him that favor, then why not do him the favor now? What's the point of doing him a favor and just keeping him on the minor league team? That doesn't make sense, really.
Yeah,
him and his agent, I would think, would be upset. But
yeah, I wasn't too, or I was a little bit surprised by that. But hopefully it's not needed. And Hayes, he went on the 10-day DL, so it would have been retroactive to yesterday. So,
right.
A week from today, he should be, as long as there's nothing really wrong with the the wrist, he should be okay.
And that looked bad right away, I will say, especially when you're crashing down on a wrist like that. It certainly looked like it could be an issue, but it didn't appear to be anything serious from what we're hearing now. 10 days is not the end of the world. Obviously, it goes without saying, best player on the team, clearly the player to watch for. I actually have an upcoming mic drop talking about keys of the Pirates and what to watch for, and clearly Key Brian Hayes' progression is one of those. Win, lose, or draw, you want to see him improving and becoming that face of the franchise and becoming that all-star player and picking up where he was last year. And honestly, too, he's the player the casual fan's going to watch for. This will hurt ratings. This will hurt attendance. I could see a lot of casual fans saying, I'm not watching this team until he returns. So you don't want it to be too long for it to linger. So that's obviously an issue. He does appear to come back as soon as possible in terms of that minimal appearance there on the injury list. Obviously a big deal. It is kind of surprising, though, for Frazier to still be with this franchise and not get that nod then. But who knows what's going on there. It's been very weird and murky with his whole time as a Pirate, even though it's not yet been with the big club. Mike Vukovcan, Mike Asti here, mic'd up on PSL here, presented by Martin Lawn Services, of course. And Mike, March Madness is over, but now we got some April Madness, to say the very, very least. One of the greatest basketball games I've ever seen with UCLA and Gonzaga, and that's efficiency all the way through. Of course, that last shot, regulation, and in overtime. We've had some great ones recently before we get to that Gonzaga-Baylor national title game. We've had great ones going back to 2016 with Villanova beating North Carolina. That was a buzzer beater. That was a great national championship game. Obviously, the game everyone points to, Christian Laettner hitting that shot with Kentucky and Duke, and Christian Laettner with Duke to beat Kentucky. At that point, that was a big deal, and that started a dynasty with Duke. So we'll see what this becomes now for Gonzaga. But where does that Gonzaga-UCLA game rank for you? Tons of intrigue there as well. You have a blue blood program with 11 national titles. Granted, it's been a while, but they're an 11 seed. They're not supposed to do it. They're in a Final Four, surprisingly. Gonzaga, a powerhouse, maybe the best program in the country now. They're looking for their first crown and to be undefeated. Tons of storyline there with major conference versus little brother, but the little brother's actually much better and been the better program. And it comes down to the wire, to say the very, very least.
Yeah, the difference, I guess, between those other games that you just referenced was the fact that when those guys were playing or those teams were playing, you were talking about, 1 versus 2 in those conferences.
Yeah, Kentucky, Duke, right. National championship, sure.
They were supposed to be there. It doesn't take away for how great the games were.
Even Chris Webber's timeout game over North Carolina.
Yeah, exactly. Here you're talking about a play-in team, number 11 versus the 1 seed. And you just kept watching the game thinking, okay, this is as soon as somebody would go on a run, you'd think, okay, this is it. Gonzaga, they're going to pull away.
Right.
And UCLA, man, they just had onions. They came back and they matched them for shot. Yeah. And that's what made the game great. People are going to reference the end of the game, the last couple minutes. I just love the fact that it was a basketball game where it went turnover field. You had teams that were shooting for the whole game. Both teams were shooting over 50 to 60%, and they kept it up for the game. You had points, drama at the end of the first regulation, and then how the game did. To me, that was I'm not going to say I remember the Duke Kentucky game. I remember how it ended. Right. As far as most recent one, the only one that I can compare was that most recent North Carolina Villanova game of a few years ago. That was it.
And honestly,
for the title.
Right. And that was for the title. And then, of course, the game, Chris Webber with North Carolina in the timeout, that was for the title. Of course, you mentioned Duke and Duke and Kentucky. That wasn't for the title, but it was in the NCAA tournament as 2 blue blood programs, and that eventually led to a championship. I think you hit the nail on the head there. This game, for me, overall, in terms of efficiency, hitting shot for shot, no team had to come back from down 20. Yeah. It was back and forth all the way through, very, very even. It actually gave me the first thought all year Gonzaga could lose.
Yes.
Because UCLA just would not go away. And again, I think history might not be fair to this game because 10 years from now, 20, 30, 40 years from now, they might say, Gonzaga, we know what they are. And then UCLA, of course, that's a name brand. That's John Wooden. That's Bill Walton. That's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. But that's not what this team was. It's an 11 seed that was in the play-in game that nobody thought would be there, that I couldn't believe they actually were there offensively with Gonzaga. We talked about that after UCLA beat Michigan. The reason they beat Michigan is because Michigan did not hit shots. They won that game with a combined 100 or so points. they were able to hit shot for shot and do it offensively with Gonzaga, who's used to hanging 80 on most teams throughout the season. And it might be the greatest game, certainly of our lifetime. I will say, though, I don't think history is going to be as friendly. I don't think it's going to be regarded as that for history and for documentaries because, as we talked about, Christian Laettner hitting that shot for everything that meant with him as an individual, with those two programs, with Coach K, there's so many storylines. It became an iconic moment that everyone's going to remember and see forever. That's not probably going to be this game. Also, when you see the girl crying in the Villanova, North Carolina, and that buzzer beater, maybe this won't be that either. But overall game in terms of style of play, it was better.
Well, I think it could be if Gonzaga runs the table and completes the deal and finishes.
Because that's history, sure.
Finishes with a national title. It'll be the first time since '76 with Indiana. Yeah. So I think that could propel this game a little bit more than it was. So we'll see what happens. As far as the title game goes, this is good as all year. Very rarely do you have at the beginning of the year when we started basketball in November, everyone said teams in college basketball all year without a doubt. Baylor, people talk, throughout the year, but rarely does that follow through and everything lines up through the tournament. And you actually get to see these two teams play. Very rarely, Gonzaga is going to enter with a 4.5. They enter as 4.5 favorite. I'm excited. I thought Gonzaga have them winning, but after watching Baylor and the way they're playing right now,
Baylor's playing like pre-COVID Baylor. This is Baylor's playing like they were before they had to sit out for 2.5 weeks, right?
I'm going the other way here. I picked Gonzaga before. I think Baylor wins tomorrow night. I think they used something a little bit with Gonzaga yesterday as far as to take them inside and beat them down in the paint. I knew Drew Timme is good, but Baylor, UCLA had one guy, Cody Riley, that was able to do that. Baylor has 3-4 guys down low that can
they have the size, right?
Yeah, exactly. And UCLA was doing that with one guy. So I think Scott Drew, that's going to be the area that they try to attack is Gonzaga's down low and try to be physical with them down low. And I think if they play like they've done these last couple games, I think Baylor could walk home with a championship here.
And that would be certainly surprising. I'm still going to pick Gonzaga and pick history to be completed. But I will say here on just this game and getting here, Gonzaga, best team all year. Proved it time and time again, despite not being in a major conference. This was a tough schedule. They did it. They're undefeated, of course. They deserve this spot. Baylor, they dealt with tons of adversity this year, including having 2.5 weeks where they couldn't play basketball, couldn't practice. And people forget, they were undefeated too until that point. Yes, they got beat up by Kansas right after that COVID break, but if it wasn't for the pandemic really screwing them over more than Gonzaga, more than most teams, they might have went through this season undefeated as well. They're certainly one of the top 2 best teams all year and are now proving it. These two teams are really, really deserving. And as great as this tournament has been, for me, I like it when we have surprises, we have entertainment, we have a wild tournament, as you should, with March Madness, even some April Madness. But I do also like it when deserving teams get there and get their shot. And it is very rare. We've seen Final Fours with 11 seeds. Of course, this year with UCLA, we've seen teams as a 9 seed get in the championship game. We've seen blue bloods, even if they don't end up as a 1 seed and they have a down year, able to dominate a tournament just because there's talent. These are two programs, neither one of them blue bloods. They're number 1 seeds. They dominated all year. They had some hiccups, but they overcame those hiccups. Gonzaga, of course, didn't lose any games. Baylor did. But they had to deal with everything they had to deal with. They're here to this point. Neither program's won a national title. They've both been building it up for years. And this is a year where you have 2 teams deserving, and we are truly getting the 2 best teams. The loser of this game is truly the runner-up, and the winner is truly the champion. There's nothing anyone can take away from these two. I do want to mention on Baylor's side, because many people are focusing on Gonzaga looking to have that first undefeated season since Indiana. with 1976. And on that note, I will say that if Gonzaga completes this, and I've alluded to this before, it is more impressive than Indiana. It's more games to win. It's a tougher schedule, even though not being in a major conference. They built it up to be a tough schedule this year. They had to deal with a freaking global pandemic, and they get through this tournament against the teams they're playing, because they're playing some tough competition, even UCLA included, with that great game that it was. This, to me, is more impressive. But on to Baylor, I think people don't realize, and maybe now they're getting the prestige, how great of an athletic program Baylor has. Now, I get football's not where it was when RG3 was there, and I get the scandal they had to get out of and how horrible it was with allegations of covering up rape and a murder, and that's obviously awful. But that's a successful football program overall the last 15 years, and they're doing it in a state that has so many legit football programs, certainly Texas there, and even Oklahoma bordering in terms of what they pull in terms of recruits. And then you add Baylor women's program in addition to the men, as that women's program, like, say, West Virginia, like Connecticut, like some others, is legit a tournament contender for the NCAA tournament in both the men's and women's every year. And Brittany Griner being there years ago as a star for the women. So this Baylor team's not really star-studded. They have some horses overall. They're a legit team. They deserve to be there. But that overall athletic program deserves the dap that they're maybe not getting. And Gonzaga, again, if they complete history and they do this and they go undefeated in this year, as bizarre as it was with their schedule, and doing it the way they did it in this tournament, despite not traveling and it being a bubbled NCAA tournament, for me, it's more impressive. And it would be outstanding to have that happen this year, since it has not happened since 76. But I think Gonzaga does do it. But if any team could stop Gonzaga, the blueprint's been there now by UCLA, and Baylor's built to potentially knock Gonzaga off. And I will say, though, Mike, and this sucks to go this direction, and we'll certainly be able to talk about it in tomorrow's show if Gonzaga would lose. But Gonzaga's been at this point before. It took them a long time to get to a Final Four through John Stockton and many others, and we know how hard it is you cover Pitt. You know how hard it is to even get to that point despite tons of years of success. And many programs have only been to a couple despite years of success. It's only the second one for Gonzaga. It took them a long time to get to a Final Four. They were runner-up before. If they're runner-up again, you hate to go this route, but it's now like the program's basically playing with national championship or bust in the future of the program. I mean, obviously they're going to be a contender every year and could be a number one seed next year, but you hate to see them not finish the job, because this really feels like their best chance at a national title, which is clearly what the end goal is. They've done everything else now, and they built it up to get to this point.
I don't think I would have agreed with that thought if they would have lost to UCLA.
Okay.
I think when you make a championship game and you're playing a number one seed, there'll be nothing to be ashamed about or nothing.
No.
They were the number 2 seed. They were the number 1 seed. You're having your 2 best teams. It's not as though it's a drop off. I think right. That's fine. The thing that I was impressed with Gonzaga, and I was thinking about this as the game was going down regulation and in overtime, was the fact that how everyone alluded to the fact that they were in no close games throughout the season. How is this team going to react?
To Gonzaga?
Yeah, Gonzaga.
Except for the one against West Virginia. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, right.
Long time ago.
But how are they going to react when their backs are against the wall and
right.
they were down? And people last 5 minutes of the game, are they going to choke?
You're trailing by a point or two.
Yeah, it's just going to be the same old Gonzaga. And they came back and they answered that block shot by Jalen Suggs. And then obviously him hitting the game-winning shot. To me, that was as good as it gets. If they lose to Baylor tonight, I just think they would lose to a good team, a very, very good team. I'm not going to call them great, but they're going to lose to a very good team if they do. They have nothing to be. Their season won't be tarnished at all. If it would have been, though, if they didn't make it to the championship game.
Yeah, and I'm not to say tarnish or they should be embarrassed by it. It certainly has been a miraculous magic carpet ride of a year. But I will say, based on recent memory, there have been teams to go through an entire year with one loss and not win the championship. So it wouldn't be as unique overall in historic perspective, even though doing it and going through an entire season would be the first time since 76. We've had some teams flirt with it throughout a year and even get to a Final Four flirting with it and then not get the job done. But this is a great Gonzaga team. They certainly could win. It's a great Baylor team. They certainly could win. It'd be great for either program overall, well, certainly this year. And I think there are great programs and great runs throughout an NCAA tournament that did not result in a championship. The Fab Five, back-to-back years in a Final Four, back-to-back years as a runner-up. They did not win a national title. There's still documentaries about them. So for Gonzaga to do this as a non-major conference team, it's just incredible. There are non-major conference teams throughout college sports, UCF in football, that they think they can play with the big boys, and sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're kind of arguing it when it's not legit because their schedule's not saying it. Gonzaga's proven themselves time and time again. They deserve the shot. We'll see if they can finally get it done. Baylor's going to be a tough road. This will be one of the tougher games a team's going to have to play to get a championship. This has not been an easy road all the way through for Gonzaga, as it's not – chalk has mostly been able to seize the day in their bracket at least. So we will see. It's going to be a great one, I'd imagine. And you just hope that it's not one of those years for championships that you have a better conference finals than you do to get to this, because it's going to be hard to really top that Gonzaga-UCLA game.
Yep, we'll see. Wish the game didn't start at I know why it happened, but this 9:20 start time is just – as you get older, you don't want to just play at 8 o'clock.
I hear you. But you look at these two teams too. Imagine that Gonzaga faithful in the Pacific Northwest. They had.
I can't stand that. But I go with Baylor. I'm switching my poll says
okay
Gonzaga, but I'm going with number 2 Baylor to get tonight. I think Mitchell, Butler, Mayer, all those guys are playing too well, and it'll be good for Scott Drew. He appears to be He appears to be a good guy. Seems to be like his dad, Homer Drew. Good people. So it'll either one of those coaches, Mark Few. They both appear to be good guys, run good programs. So should be entertaining.
Yeah, and also from Mark Few's standpoint, it really shows you that if you stay the course with a coach, you can really be benefited. They let him be there for a long time. He's built it up to now what it is, and they allowed some growing pains early on. They allowed some disappointments, failing to get to Final Fours early on. Funny enough, you got to hear Adam Morrison on the call there. You get some soundbite from him when they beat UCLA, as you could remember, when he lost in the Sweet 16 with Gonzaga, when it was a year where he could have been co-player, where he was co-player of the year through most of that season, and eventually got drafted in the NBA. UCLA, the big boy, knocked him off. So it almost felt like that was revenge for himself. We will see what Gonzaga does. A lot of more pressure on them than on Baylor, but it's going to be a great game either way. Great season for both. And I also think that Baylor doing it, not that this matters for other programs in the conference, but it would be nice for the Big 12 as well. Big 12 has been the best conference all year for me. The schedule's been brutal for all those Big 12 teams. The Big 12 has not won a national title in either basketball or football in a while, even though they've been very, very competitive. So it would be nice for the Big 12 to claim the crown, and I think this Baylor team would be very, very deserving. The time stamp does make it hard, though, for sure. We'll all get through it and try to catch up on our sleep after the madness concludes, as that will do it, of course, for this edition of the show, our post-Easter edition here of Mic'd Up on Pittsburgh Sports Live. He's Mike Vukovcan. I'm Mike Asti. Of course, subscribe to the channel and hit us up throughout the family of networks, and enjoy the completion of the madness.